Kermit the Hermit, written and illustrated by Bill Peet. In Monterey Bay, there's a jumble of rocks stacked up like a castle across from the dock. The king of this castle, an old crab called Kermit, lived all by himself in a cave like a hermit. There was never a crab who was one half as selfish or 1/10 as mean as this crusty old shellfish. What made Kermit greedy and grumpy that way was the shortage of food everywhere in the bay. For a crab must depend on what he can find, small scraps and tidbits of any old kind. To Kermit each day meant a fight for survival, with every last seagull and crab as a rival. Unless it is cured, sometimes greediness grows. Where it finally stops, alas, nobody knows. And before very long, Kermit grabbed everything, from a rusty padlock to a ball of kite string, a broken jackknife, a pair of old shoes, things that a crab couldn't possibly use. And his cave was soon crammed, without 1 inch to spare. There was just enough space left for Kermit in there. Like any old miser, he wanted a lot of something or other, he didn't care what. And he'd have been greedy the rest of his days if an old twist of fate hadn't changed Kermit's ways. This remarkable change in old Kermit began with an everyday thing, just a battered tin can. A pork and bean can that had been tossed away far out in the sand dunes that bordered the bay. The crumpled tin lid caught the sun's bright reflection, which caused it to sparkle in every direction. And since the old miser had never been told that bright things that glitter are not always gold, he supposed that it must have been some valuable thing that somebody had lost, like a watch or a ring. So he crawled off the rocks and onto the land, then over the hilly broad stretches of sand. And until Kermit was next to his prize, did he realize he had a trick played on his eyes. "Why, you phony tin faker, you," growled the old grump. "Rubble like you should be tossed in a dump." Then just as he turned to start back for the bay, the crab spied a dog who was heading his way. The dog was exploring and trying out smells, sniffing at driftwood and empty clamshells. One sniff at the can told him what had been in it. So he then turned to sniff at Kermit a minute. In one grab, the crab gave the dog a sharp nip. On his sensitive nose, he let out a yip. "That'll teach you," he snapped, "to go sniffing at me." Then he turned himself around to head back for the sea. But the dog made a leap, seized the crab in his jaws, by the back of the shell beyond reach of his claws. "Put me down," cried the crab. "Put me down, you big brute, or I'll give you another good pinch in the snoot." But the dog paid no heed to old Kermit's command. He set to work digging a hole in the sand. The crab guessed at once it was not just a cave. It was going straight down, so it must be a grave. "What a horrible end," Kermit said with a groan, "to be buried alive like a worthless old bone." Just then the dog dropped the crab in the hole. A boy happened by with a long fishing pole. "You old hound," he scolded. "What a mean thing to do. Now how would you like it if I buried you? You're too nice a dog to do something like that." Then he scooped up the crab in his tattered straw hat, trotted off down the beach to the edge of the sea, and flipping his hat, he set Kermit free. With a sigh of relief, the old crab went his way, on back to his castle in the rocks of the bay. If it weren't for the boy, he had to admit, there'd be no tomorrow, that would have been it. "I'll reward my young friend," said old Kermit, "that's what. With all my life savings, every last thing I've got. But things like old shoes or broken jackknife could never repay him, not for saving my life. The ideal reward would be a new bike. There's something I'm sure that small boy would like. Yet how can a crab ever buy a bicycle without any money, not even a nickel?" He pondered the problem the whole afternoon. Then far into the night, by the light of the moon, but try as he might, alas and alack, he thought of no way he could pay the boy back. The next afternoon, as he crawled on the rocks, Kermit spotted the boy at the end of the docks. The very same boy. The old crab could tell that by his faded striped shirt and his tattered straw hat. He had been lulled to sleep by the warm summer breeze, with his fishing pole propped in his patch-trousered knees. "I might help him catch a fish," Kermit thought, "if there's any big fish around here to be caught." Of course, he must first find the boy's baited hook, so he scrambled out into the bay for a look, and just a few yards from the pilings he found it, with a school of small minnow all swarming around it. Lightly gripping the line just below the lead weight, Kermit tiptoed along gently, dragging the bait. If he happened to give it at the littlest jerk, the boy would reel in and his plan wouldn't work. So Kermit kept on till he came to a ledge where he stopped to peer cautiously over the edge. When reaching as far as he could with his claws, he lowered the bait toward a halibut's jaws. The big fish took a look, and in one mighty scoop, both the worm and the hook disappeared in one gloop. When he found he'd been hooked, he took off like a streak, and the line, which was really too flimsy and weak, suddenly snapped from the force of the shock somewhere behind Kermit, back near the dock. He was on his way now, with no one to help, and off he went flying through tangles of kelp. Up over the waves he went flippity-flip, straight out of the bay on a wild foamy trip. Then somewhere far out in the broad rolling sea, the furious fish finally fought his way free. Way out in deep water the crab couldn't crawl. About all he could do was let himself fall. And Kermit went tumbling down in slow motion into the dark gloomy depths of the ocean, to the soft sandy floor where he lit with a plunk, near the place where an old pirate ship had sunk. The huge hull had been smashed, the sails were ripped and tattered, and in every direction the cargo was scattered. "I imagine," said Kermit, "I'm not safe down here. There's much more to this place than this weird atmosphere." Some creature was watching, the old crab could tell, by the cold, creepy feeling that ran through his shell. Crouching flat in the sand, he peered into the dark. He suddenly saw it, a monstrous blue shark. As the shark wheeled around for a head-on attack, Kermit spied an old chest that was open a crack. He got there a second before the shark did, and in a wild scramble squeezed under the lid. Pushing hard with his snout, the big fish tried his best to force up the lid of the heavy old chest. He lunged with a fury and all the brute strength of his broad fins and tail and his 20-foot length. But the lid's double hinges were solid with rust and a century's thickness of barnacle crust. So the crab stayed within while the shark stayed without. All he got for his pains was a badly bruised snout. And he finally turned tail, then he went on tearing in search for a school of sardines or some herring. Not until he was sure the big shark was long gone did Kermit look down to see what he sat on. The old chest was filled pretty near to the top with a heap of gold pieces that made his eyes pop. "How strange," Kermit muttered. "No one found it here before. It can't be much more than 2 miles from shore. But anyway, all this gold treasure's mine now, if I can just haul it back to my castle somehow." With a coin in each claw, he set out for the bay, with his life in great danger every step of the way. Not only the shark, other big fish as well, can easily bite through the Krusty Krab shell. To avoid being caught by these crab-hungry enemies, he scuttled behind the dense clumps of anemones. Here in the deep shadows were mostly blue-green, so bluish-green crab there could scarcely be seen. Every day for 3 months, Kermit made the round trip, returning each time with 2 coins in his grip. To make room for the treasure, he emptied his cave of the rubble he'd gone through so much trouble to save. After stacking the gold into one gleaming pile, his crusty face cracked a satisfied smile. He was thinking of all the great pleasure and fun such a treasure would bring to a certain someone. Then he crawled from his cave for a view of the bay, in hopes that he'd find the young boy and the young friend there that day. Since the dock was deserted, he looked towards the shore, where he'd seen some small boys, 6 or more, tall ones and scrawny ones, one who was fat, but not one of them wore a striped shirt or straw hat. But his young friend might wear something else altogether, since the winter had come and its cold, foggy weather. But anyway, what could I do? Just walk up and say, "Here's a present for you"? Then he heaved such a deep and most sorrowful sigh. He attracted a pelican roosting nearby. "Now cheer up, old fella," the big bird began, smiling as only a pelican can. "If you've got a problem, please let me suggest you tell it to me. Get it off of your chest." No one could resist such a friendly big smile, so the crab told his tale to him after a while, showed all the gold when he came to the end, then tried to describe his heroic young friend. "That boy," said the bird, "is familiar to me. Some people watch birds. I watch people, you see. The lad has 2 sisters and also 1 brother, and then, I'm quite certain, a mother and father. They live in a very small 3-room red shack in a south part of town beside the train track. I could carry the treasure there inside my beak, but I'd swallow it all, for my beak has a leak. So, if you would like, I'll just give you a lift. Besides, you're the one to deliver the gift." And so, with 2 gold pieces tight in his grip, Kermit took off on his first flying trip, across the broad bay in one breathtaking swoop, away through the dense fog as thick as pea soup. By the time Kermit got up the nerve to look down, the big bird was soaring out over the town. Below was a small cottage, painted barn red, beside the train track, as the pelican had said. The poor people lived there was easy to see, for there was the house without a TV. As the pelican came to a fluttering stop alongside the chimney, he let the coins drop. They fell to the bottom, the 2 friends could tell, for the pot-bellied stove went kerpong like a bell. Then inside the house, great excitement broke out. "Why, it's gold! It's really gold!" they heard somebody shout. The family ran out to see what it could be, but discovered the fog had rolled in from the sea. The ghostly white curtain closed everywhere, so they never caught the sight of whoever was there. The high-flying crab in the pelican's beak brought the family a fortune inside of a week. Soon they had a TV and all sorts of toys, such as dolls for the daughters and bikes for the boys. All the rest of the gold, which was quite an amount, they set safely aside in a savings account. For the wise father said, "It's not every day that a fortune is dropped down our chimney that way."